Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, lads and lads. Welcome to the YouTube channel. This is Rant with Racquet episode 13, I believe, 12, maybe 14. Either one. This is going to be all about LS. I doubt you guys would want to hear about me. This is about the superstar in action, LS. Now, I'm not interviewing him. This is just my particular opinion on sort of the backlash, the sort of surrounding hype around the person, and what I can sort of evaluate from some of the experience I've had, or the little experience I've had in the esports industry, and being an active viewer of LS for a variety of years. So where exactly are we going to tackle this? There are a bunch of comments that LS has made to sort of better contextualize a lot of his philosophies on several different podcasts or forums he has participated in, whether that be the Healthy Gamer GG, whether it be Summoning Insight, whether it be the Pog State. There are several, whether it be his own stream, there are several different sort of mediums you can look to in terms of, how we can better understand LS and where these strong opinions come from. And unfortunately, everyone doesn't have access to these types of things, or they do, but maybe people don't have the time to view all of it, or they would want a better summarization. And I'm sure this podcast won't exactly help you, because it is a podcast and it will go for a bit of a length, but I'm going to try my best to try and sort of look from both views and acknowledge with my own opinion, to see how we're going to exactly approach this situation. So from LS himself, this is a statement that he's made. He's either loved or hated. And he's sort of polarizing in that sort of sense, from coming up with very strong opinions within the League community. And this is someone who has come from an extensive StarCraft experience. I've been played it for a very long time, ever since I believe when he was a kid. He referenced that on the Healthy Gamer GG YouTube video, the first one, I believe. And he sort of tries to develop that sort of strategy from that game and a lot of the earlier games that he's played, like whether it be fighting games or card games, and he tries to sort of translate it into League of Legends, which is something that is not really done very often. And it's cool because for people who might not be actively involved with League of Legends, you're giving them a language, a translation as to how to understand certain concepts. This can become controversial for some people, because they may not understand what the concept is, or they may not have played the game in order to understand the contextual evidence of where it may have come from, and he's maybe making it up, or people claim for him to be a contrarian, which he did address on the last episode of the Healthy GG on the distressing video. I mean, there are a bunch of different things, but at the end of the day, he's just translating his past experience and putting it into a League of Legends setting where things can make sense, and he's creating a different idea from what the normal is. MOBAs aren't exactly the oldest or the youngest genre. I mean, you could look at several different aspects of which LS was experienced in, and those are definitely older than what MOBAs were, or MOBAs were at least mods, and they weren't as popular back then. So he's bringing different concepts into MOBAs. I mean, the concept of freezing has been a very controversial one for a lot of people, because the counter argument is like, oh yeah, if you just continue to freeze, you can be vulnerable, and you can get dove. And then LS would counteract that and saying that these guys don't understand what I'm talking about, because you're sort of I'll give you a better example. One common misconception about what LS says in terms of scaling. Okay, this is going to be a prime example. So most people, when they listen to LS talk about scaling, especially the casual viewer base that maybe does not listen to him extensively, when they hear the word scaling, the layman's terms, it's like, oh, champions that activate late game, champions that have insane numbers, they can do a lot more later in the game, and they are useless early game. That is the sort of bubble that people acknowledge as what scaling is. But it's sort of misunderstood, the definition, because when LS further explained what scaling was, and what good scaling champions are is that these champions can operate in the early game, they can win lane in the early game, or they can at least be safe in the early game. In fact, the champions that he does favor with these scaling, a lot of them actually have pretty decent matchups within the lane, right? So when you take that into consideration, he's formulating an argument in that there is no downside to picking a scaling champion because theoretically, right, you want to have... Imagine a game of League of Legends where you have at all states of the game something is there to do. Okay? When you have a scaling champion versus a non-scaling champion, let's just compare it to like, you know, a Garen or whatever. It's like a champion with minimal utility that can like capitalize on the early mid game or whatever. It's a very simple example. Maybe Garen's not the best example, but like just picture this. Champions that can do well, but if you are faced in a situation where you don't snowball extremely hard and the opposition is fighting into you, then you can win that. Okay? But if the opposition is holding back and they're playing around this sort of aggressive, ruthless playstyle, there is going to be a point in the game where that champion will be useless, and despite accumulating perhaps an early game lead, that is negated through better draft. So better champions like Ornn, champions like Gangplank, these champions that can interact within lane and have a massive impact throughout all stages of the game, and they are going to be a main reason as to why your late game is going to be an operation of sorts, right? So yeah, that's a concept that a lot of people may struggle to understand, is that when he says late game, he doesn't mean, pick, cast and top and then wait 40 minutes. He means like champions that can still do things theoretically. And even if you were to be behind, there are still ways to play with that champion or for that champion in order for them to work. Because that's how drafts work, okay? You're setting up a composition in order for things to function. And what LS believes is that he thinks people and team compositions and people, coaches, players, fall on defaults because they're very vulnerable and they're not. They don't want to sort of get within or outside of their comfort zone. So it extends. It's like it's a big branch, okay? And this is difficult to explain maybe on broadcast of LCK because you also have an obligation as a caster to fill within the information to give the entertainment value, making sure you're actively engaging with the viewers and making sure that eyeballs are on you. It's difficult to explain long-winded concepts, although LS actually probably out of all the classes I've heard, he does like explain those type of concepts. But I also think that is also due to the slow pace of the LCK, where it is given more time to have these conversations. Hence why Monty and Doa sort of had that sort of similar style too, the more laid back style. So yeah. Anyway, we're going off on tangents. The thing that I really respect from LS as well, which is what we were talking about before, is he introduces different avenues from his perspectives on the past and applies it to League of Legends. Now, another great example would actually be his Magic the Gathering one, which is probably my favorite. Now, I'm not an expert on Magic the Gathering by, no means, but I have, the basic fundamentals of what colors do what. And he would apply these color concepts to champions. Whether, I wasn't exactly sure what his exact criteria was for each color, but, red would be like, early game aggressive, like just like how these colors applied from those cards and how you can attribute them to champions so that you can have sort of a sheet of statistics where you can identify what are the strengths and weaknesses of each champion and what they can achieve, which is a fantastic idea. I mean, one of his examples was Gangplank, and Gangplank was like one of the most ludicrously stacked champions in terms of the amount of cards you can allocate him, or the amount of colored cards, because of how flexible he was, right? But yeah, just another concept I love. It looks like I'm fanboying LS right now, and I apologize for that. But yeah. So we've gone through a little bit of some of the philosophies, the concepts that LS has brought to League of Legends, and some of the misunderstandings that the public, has on those sort of concepts that he brings forward. Let's talk about his casting style. Now, last year he didn't receive an invitation for the World Championships. I would before I just put a little asterisk. I would talk about the Sinner and Saints thing later on, but yeah, he didn't get invited to the World Championships. I don't believe it was made public as to why in particular. He just said he didn't get an invitation. People, when they were sort of speculating, said, "Oh, it's because his style wasn't suit for Riot. He's a bad caster, bad commentator." Now, this is my view. This is probably going to be the least sort of, I wouldn't say biased. This is the least leeway I'm giving to LS out of the whole argument that I'm bringing. I've put him in favor of everything. I've said that this guy's wonderful at what he does. This is the most... it's not troubling for me to analyze the way he commentates, because I think it's great, but I can at the same time understand as to why he wouldn't be invited to the World Championships. Let me explain. I think his commentary is great. I think it introduces a different style. It's this very, I wouldn't say aggressive, like analytical style, it's sort of similar to Monte Cristo's in this sort of sense, right? Like, he is more micro based than what Monty is, I believe, and he could acknowledge niche matchups and like compositional differences where certain things could matter in lane, and how the waves would interact with each other, and how sort of he just realizes a lot of very niche things that a lot of the player base wouldn't understand, and he explains these concepts in game, and it sort of brings an artificial story within the whole game of like his concepts and how they're actually being played out within the two teams, right? But at the same time, LS is blunt, very, very blunt. And when it comes to the world stage, when it comes to other Riot casters, this has been an issue for a little bit in Riot games, where they are not blunt enough, and they're sort of too nice. They like to ignore a lot of the mistakes of teams and say that, oh, this team, instead of saying, oh, this team's doing awful, they'll say, oh, the other team is doing a fantastic job at like capitalizing on certain things, and like, no, they wouldn't need to capitalize on it if the team opposite didn't have so many bad mistakes, okay, that were created in the first place that shouldn't have happened, and they're throwing the game for themselves. LS has that sort of mentality where he can pause and say, no, what these guys are doing fucking garbage. They should really stop that, and I'll call them out on that. This is something in terms of the layman's viewership in a world championship scenario where people are being blunt and they're underselling teams. That's not from me, that's like a quote from... I've heard this from several casters. You have to sell the teams or whatever. But LS brings a unique style that may not be viewer friendly from Riot's perspective. That isn't from my perspective. Okay, maybe that's what I would perceive to be as Riot's perspective when they are judging LS on whether he should go to the World Championships or not. He is, I'm pretending to be right now. LS is too blunt. We can't have him underselling teams and players because he's going to destroy our storylines and ruin the rest. He's Korean biased. No, the last couple of things aren't relevant. I was just joking with that. But yeah, like, I personally think he introduces a different style in casting that I enjoy. He's very, very honest. Like, LS is an extremely honest person. I respect him for that. and he certainly does warrant a world spot. It's just whether he can get past, I believe, the politics that Riot could have. So yeah, there we go. That's my little take on that. But yeah, the Sinners versus Saints thing. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. It's a very cool concept. We're referring to it on Summoning Insight. That is, in fact, the name of the Summoning Insight episode that LS recently featured in. And it's really interesting how the development period came within those things. I mean, the good thing about LS is, once again, I'm referring to his honesty here. It's wonderful to see that, I mean, someone that's come from a coaching background and a competitive background and doing casting, he's not afraid to voice his own opinion despite where he is. Maybe, I mean, look several years ago, like Monty's example with one of his musings about Riot's casting cage, where a lot of people were being restricted on what they were saying, and they were too scared to speak out of what was happening. Now, referring back to LS, this guy does not give a shit. He does give a shit to a certain extent. Well, he does give a lot of shits, but like the Betrayal, the LS personality that like talks on Twitter and like has these very strong opinions. He wants to help. He wants things to get better. But like, even if he says something that's like so left field, that's out from the norm, he will do it because he thinks it would be an advantageous position if people were to take advantage of it. Whether it be, you know, I mean, the classic one's Morellonomicon, okay? Where this is, in fact, I mean, something that's even changed the way that pros look at the item. Where he's doing mathematical equations to sort of look at how much value you are getting from the item as opposed to maybe Leandri's. How much healing negation are you doing from against the opposing enemies? If they have no heal on the enemy team, if they have one healer, if they have like a Soraka, if they have, you know, one Mordekaiser, is it worth getting the Morellonomicon? Like, drawing these 5 lines as to where that item's actually viable. He was the first one to call it out, and it like wasn't anything discreet. It's not like, oh, that item there is pretty bad. It's like, what the fuck are you doing with a Morellonomicon? That's bullshit. Like, you're a pro player. You should know like these things. You're studying. You're playing the game. Like, I don't understand why so many pros make this mistake time and time again. And he harps on it. That's what I love about us. He harps on things until it is made into a reality. He did this with the late game compositions, where, you know, progressing through worlds, we sort of did see a trend besides FPX, where the late game compositions, or not, sort of afterwards, I think, where the late game compositions were being favoured a little bit more. Now, a lot of the concepts that he is saying, I'm getting a little bit too excited here, are coming to fruition. You know, the Morellonomicon is a great example of that too. But yeah, like, we've talked across a bunch of areas, and I think as a sort of closing note to this video, I would advise people who hate on LS to really watch Healthy Gamer GG's videos with LS and the interviews, because he is an extremely advanced person. And, you know, I'm not fit to have any opinions on someone else's mental health. I am studying counseling, but that isn't, like, on the same level as psychology. But, you know, people should try to understand personalities over the internet better, instead of grasping at straws and putting things out of context to try and make someone look like an enemy. I think people look at LS as a contrarian, yet with a lot of the concepts that he does bring, he is consistent with them. It's not like he's doing it just for fun. It's like he's doing it just for views or the crowd, or to get more attention, because the reality is LS has stayed pretty much the same for a very, very long time. He's always had the opinion of like, oh, if you want to climb out of low elo, just lock in Annie. Like, she's a fantastically easy champion for you to climb out of gold with. Like, there are a lot of concepts where LS has been saying for years and years and years, And when it comes into the modern day where he's a lot more popular, people are saying, oh, no, you're just saying that for attention. No, LS has been doing this for when he had 2 viewers on the stream, for when he's had 500 viewers on the stream, for when he's had 8,000 viewers on the stream. He's saying the same shit, but because of how his work ethic is and the way that he's been consistent throughout the years, he's managed to develop a brand in which he can differentiate himself from other people. And he may not be the same arse licker as other Riot employees will be, in terms of, there isn't any balance issues here. We're just going to say every player in the LCS is fantastic. LS is extremely honest with his opinions, and for people who are casually viewers of the game, they can pretend like these things don't exist. These problems that do exist are completely gone, and they are not in this plane, they're not on this earth. It doesn't exist, so we appreciate that. You either love or you hate LS. That's from his mouth, but I think in order to judge that, I mean, that is the case for a lot of people, but since he is so polarizing, I suggest to you guys who maybe are not really a fan of LS to watch his YouTube videos with Healthy Gamer GG, where he dissects, he's very fantastic at this, by the way, a lot of what the thought processes are of LS, the philosophies, how hardworking he is, and how logical he tries to work within his daily life. He is so incredibly intelligent, and it's hurting him. Okay, that's my basic psychologist rant. But I mean, I don't have any room to comment on that. I don't know him personally. So yeah, that's pretty much going to be the end of this video. This is something I wanted to say for a little bit now, and this isn't only for LS. This is for a lot of people throughout the esports community that are represented, whether they are frowned upon, whether they are highly praised. I mean, I'll try my best to try and bring my opinion and the evidence from personal interaction within podcasts and streams, because I love watching those type of things, and I can try and get a sense for what they are trying to evoke, or whatever. I mean, I'm not popular than any more of these guys, but I just try to make a podcast each and every week. It could be literally about anything in the world. So since I was working in esports a little bit before, I thought I'll try to sort of bring my dimmed light towards the situation and see if I can say more stuff that people would agree with, or maybe if it helps, whatever. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. Take care. Hope you all have a wonderful night, evening, morning, or whatever. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.